to my chagrin, the NAACP has come out in favor of the view that this is an issue of civil rights. So the organization that knows more about civil rights than probably any other organization in this nation has said that this is a civil rights issue. So we should allow this because we are denying them their civil rights if we do not allow gays to marry.
Yeah, actually, it's an insult to the civil rights movement. Now, I understand the mentality. You're born this way, you can't change, you're being persecuted, you're being rejected, you don't have the same rights that others have. But the analogy breaks down on every level. Let's also recognize that there are plenty of black Americans that feel the way that you do and absolutely believe that gay activists have hijacked the civil rights movement. Right. There's the Coalition of African American Pastors. I had the leader of that, Reverend Bill Owens, on my radio show a couple of weeks ago. He was involved in the desegregation of the lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee in the late 50s, early 60s, and he made clear we were not marching and doing what we did so that two men could marry. So let's think of the analogy. Number one, you cannot compare skin color and ethnicity to behavior. Two totally different things.
Right.
You can't compare skin color and ethnicity to romantic attraction and sexual behavior. That's the first thing that breaks down. The second thing that breaks down is you cannot compare the suffering that the gay and lesbian community have gone through, which is very real, getting bullied, getting beat up, some of them getting killed, with the history of the slave trade
right.
and segregation. We don't have gay-only drinking fountains. We don't have
right.
gays sitting at the back of the bus. In fact, you have national famous people like Ellen DeGeneres and congressmen like Barney Frank, and the list goes on in terms of prominent, famous, influential gay and lesbian people in our society. So you can't compare this to slavery, segregation.
Right.
Also, there's nothing wrong with a black man and a white woman coming together in union. The components for marriage, relationship, male, female, are all there, and there's nothing in Scripture that's against that whatsoever. And all you have to do is get rid of bigotry and bias. That's the only thing that stood in the way of interracial marriage. When it comes to two men or two women, you are now fundamentally redefining marriage. You are also fundamentally going against explicit scriptural teaching. You now have to indoctrinate little children into this, that this one has two mommies, this one has two daddies, and it becomes a threat to religious liberties and freedoms because we can't even hold to biblical convictions.
Right.
In no way is gay the new black.
Right.
And again, we have a long list of inaccuracies there. We're going to start off by just pointing out the obvious. Civil rights is not something reserved for only one group of people. And it's ironic that we want to object to civil rights being applied to gays, but yet we did not object to civil rights being applied to the elderly. We did not object to civil rights being applied to the handicapped or the physically challenged, Now, I will concede that behavior is a choice. However, our skin color is not a choice, granted, but neither are our sexual attractions. That has been shown over and over and over again through psychology. Now, as far as being no gay drinking fountains and no gay restrooms and no gay slavery, let me ask you, is discrimination acceptable only to a certain point? Because that's what I hear you saying. I hear you saying that because gays were not enslaved, because gays were not segregated, then it's not discrimination. And no, I call foul on that. You can't say that discrimination is acceptable to a certain point. Now, to that end, I would tell you, you need to get rid of your own bigotry, and you need to get rid of your own bias. And I remind you again, and again, and again, that Christians have redefined marriage many times over. Now, this idea that your religious liberties are being threatened is completely grotesque. No one is telling Christians that they can't get married. No one is telling Christians that they cannot picket gay funerals. But you, on the other hand, are telling gays that we cannot enjoy the same civil liberties and civil rights that you enjoy. So, no one is threatening your religious freedoms. Now, as far as the incident, which I'm aware of the child's parents not being allowed to be notified and pull or opt their child out of certain same-sex education, I have conflicting beliefs, and I will start with this. Maybe the parents should have the right to do that. But the consequence of that is that the child will not be fully prepared for the reality of the world, because same-sex marriage is here. Same-sex parent homes are here. And if you deprive your child of being acclimated to that reality, regardless of whether or not you choose to accept that as moral and right and just, and regardless of whether or not you choose to teach your child that that is right or wrong, if you do not prepare them for that reality, then they step into the world less prepared than they should be.
When I look at the history of African Americans, when I look at the millions who died on the Middle Passage, who were taken from their homeland and who were treated as property, who were abused and sold and beaten and maimed, all of these things for hundreds of years.
By the thousands and thousands and thousands.
Yes.
Multiplied thousands beyond description.
I mean, and you look at the horrendous conditions in which they came over to this country and compare that, there is no comparison.
No.
And it just, I think that what they're doing is they're playing, I'm just going to say it, they're playing black people for suckers. They're saying, you know what, we're going to ride on your coattail because it's beneficial to us. And unfortunately, there are a lot of black people who are saying, you know what, we've had people, you know, who just basically besmirching the history of African Americans, who basically besmirching the history of those who actually suffered, those who actually went through the torment and the torture, and to allow them to ride our coattail just because they want to ride it, just so they can do what they want to do.
Yeah, it's
Gays have been beaten and maimed and treated as property and held within horrendous conditions, and have been and continue to be put to death. I think you forget that homosexuals were placed in the concentration camps right next to the Jews. And again, I remind you, no one complained when it was the elderly or those of other ethnicity or those who are physically challenged also stood up and said, we want our civil rights. Civil rights is not a purview of only one group of people, because if we apply civil rights to only one group of people, then we have no civil rights.